Okay, so we're at 6 o'clock. It's the top of the hour, so let's get this show on the road. Just for reference, folks, I feel I should mention this right off the bat. We are recording this session here, so if you don't want to be recorded on camera, please turn your camera off. And if you don't feel comfortable being recorded live, obviously, please feel free to use the chat to ask questions and whatnot. So. Welcome to the April edition of the Vancouver Power BI and Modern Excel User Group Meetup. My name's Ken Pulse, and I'm excited that we've got a great show for us today here. We're into our welcome and overview now. We are going to be just covering off some intro slides here, and then we're super excited to welcome our good friend Yana back for our What's New in Power BI. It's been far too long since she's done one of these for us. We've missed her, and she is going to be taking over that duty because our fellow who usually does it now, Joseph, is going to be leading the feature presentation after this is done, talking about building financial statements with Power BI and DAX. So it's going to be an entertaining evening for tonight. Before we get into that, I just want to throw out a big thanks to the sponsors here. Excel Guru is my company, obviously, that organizes and pulls these things together. Skill Wave Training is our training division, and this is kind of entertaining because we've actually got 3 people who are presenting tonight who all work with different online training offerings that we have here. So one of the things that I will always say with this is, while I would love you to come and learn from my company, please make sure you learn from someone, because you can just never get enough knowledge out there. But SkillWave is my training division. We've got some awesome Power Query and Power BI training up there that we highly recommend you check out. Obviously, Microsoft helps us out with a lot of things, so a big thanks to them. And the last thing that I want to throw out is a shout out to the Excel Guru Monkey Tools add-in, which will help you build better data models faster starting in Excel. We also audit Power BI, and we've got a whole bunch of cool stuff there. If you're interested, you can check that out at excelguru.ca/monkeytools. Really, really useful software to hopefully make your life easier. Our next meetups that are coming up, we've mentioned a couple times in the past year, we've got a Cooking with Oz, a lesson in Excel creativity that is coming up on May 6th. Super excited about this one. We've got 4 ingredients that we've pulled together. The details are on the meetup page, and Oz is going to put them together in a weird and wonderful way. This is not about building something useful. It's about building something creative. I can tell you that I have also put together my own solution based on this, and I'll be showing mine as well, and Oz is encouraging people to show what they come up with as well. The registration for that one is now open, by the way. If you're interested in coming and participating, we would love to have you there. Our next Power BI meetup a month from now on May 20th, we are super excited to be welcoming Ancy Phillip from the Power BI team. She is going to be talking about AI in Power BI. She has a history in working in programming on the team and is now a program manager there and works on some of the cool AI features, including smart narratives and other things there. So this is going to be pretty darn exciting. We're really looking forward to it. Anytime we get someone direct from Microsoft to talk about these things, it's always obviously an exciting opportunity. Just another quick note on Oz. These are the 4 random ingredients he's got: the floor function, data validation using the text length rule, dynamic arrays, and emojis. He's going to put that all together into one possibly useful scenario. We'll see. We'll see how it all works out here. Once again, as I say, if you're interested, please sign up and come along here. It should be an entertaining night. Whenever Oz is involved, things are always entertaining, so we can pretty much bank on that. Last thing I want to throw out there is, if you are interested in coming up and speaking at VanPug, we would love to have you. Please go and fill out this survey here and tell us what you'd like to talk about. We're always interested in welcoming first-time speakers. We obviously always try and go and get the Power Query and Power BI rock stars from around the world as well. But you know what? Everybody gets started somewhere, and we want our platform to be a welcoming place where people can actually get started, because guess what? Every single one of us spoke for a first time once, at least once. Anyhow, if you're interested, please let us know. We'd love to have you. And on that note, my screen just went black. So guess what? I think it's time to actually toss this over to our returnee, Yana Berkovich. She is going to give us, and this is awesome because I think I've mentioned before, Yana is like the only person or one of the only people in the world that can actually speak faster than I do. And that's a darn good thing because she's got 2 months of what's new in Power BI to cover in 15 minutes. You ready, Yana?
Yes, hopefully.
All right,
I,
I'm
I will
I'm
try
going to
to
shut
do
up.
it.
Go.
I will try to do it in a slower pace because this is something that usually comes up. So my first presentation, just to share, was in a SharePoint user group, and it was many years ago. And I do encourage you to speak for the Power BI user group. The first one didn't always go to plan, but since then things improved. So I encourage you, and I would love to attend your presentation when Ken invites me. So hope to see new speakers soon. On that note, hi, I'm Yana Berkovich. I was actually in Vancouver about a year and a half ago, but currently I am a PM for instructor-led training in Microsoft, and I used to be a data platform MVP, and this is how I know all the all the exciting people of this field. So if you are considering being an MVP or joining, this is something. This is a journey that might take you to great places once Corona ends, of course. My Twitter is always open to your feedback and LinkedIn as well, so I would love to connect with all of you. You are invited. So what is instructor-led training? Before we are starting the Power BI journey, I wanted you to get introduced to the instructor-led training. This is the program that I am leading in Microsoft. Instructor-led training gives you the ability to review in one day either Power BI, Power App, Power Virtual Agent, or Power Automate product. And it is actually a program that is teaching you from the beginner's level of dashboard in a day and up in a day to more advanced like admin in a day or data visualization in a day, or even build your own solution for Power Apps in one day. Where can you find all those exciting trainings? So I got the links for you in the presentation, but you can also find it in the community. So this is your Power BI instructor training, and here you can see all the training links. Now, how can you participate in the training? On the bottom, you can see all the offers, and you can find more services by clicking here of who is going to present the next advanced training. If there are any trainers or partners among you, please reach out so we can so you can download the content and deliver it to your attendees. Of course, it is free content for partners, MVP, and user group leads that Microsoft provides you, and you can charge your attendees for the delivery of this specific content whenever you're ready. And other than the Power BI, there are more Power Platform, hands-on lab, and trainings that can be found here. As I said, in the presentation, you will find all the links. Okay, back to PowerPoint, hopefully. Not back to PowerPoint. So that was not considered in the 15 minutes. So now we can start the 15 minutes actually. So the most visually exciting update for this update cycle, I think for March and April, was the charticulator. I really hope I think I misspelled it, but it is a hard word to spell. So what is a charticulator? So charticulator is basically a platform that was created by a third party. Now it's a visual inside Power BI generally available. That sorry, in a preview, that you can import the visual from the app source and fields of data and basically create your own visualization. So you kind of will see this type of screen that allows you to create the visualization of your choice. Of course, you can upload from a template more visualizations that you cannot see here. And most of you, including myself, are quite new to Charticulator, although the Charticulator was a third-party tool about 2 years ago, give or take. And there are some very, very beautiful lectures about it. So to learn the basic, you need to go to the Get Started with Charticulator and make sure you are following all the steps. So I will show you in a few seconds, I suppose, also how it is looking in Power BI and where you can find that. The next other visual report updates that you can find in the past few months are, first of all, the color picker. The color picker became much more colorful, if I may, and there are many more options there. So all the colors that you pick for your visuals are now have now more abilities to be beautiful and exciting. However, when you are using the color picker, and this is something that I would like to emphasize, please think about accessibility, about color contrast, about visually not accessible reports and reports that have too many colors. So all of those guidance you can find, for example, in our advanced data visualization course or in docs, guidance for how to make your reports exciting but still accessible. We have new improved shapes, which I'll also show today. We have invert axis and continuous axis sorting, so you can sort on the axis itself. You do not need to sort the data anymore, something that was really missing because it is sometimes a lot of pain before they introduce this feature. Word wrap in titles is a preview. An update to background settings also is in a preview. Analytics and X contrast line in line chart. This is what you can see in the right side, that we have got the contrast between the line chart and the rest of the data. So let's go to the, no, not here. Let's go to the Power BI report. This is okay, this is Power BI report that are usually used in advanced data visualization. It is based on the Van Arsdale sales report. And what I did, I basically imported the Charticulator visual inside here. I already have got all the data in the report. In the Charticulator visual, after I imported it here from the store and imported it to the canvas, I can go here and click on edit. And now I will show you what happens with preview. I cannot import the templates in preview. It's grayed out. Sometimes things like this happened. I needed to reinstall. Unfortunately, I didn't. Template here, for example, you can download the template. This template or that template, all the templates will be downloaded to your computer, and you can hopefully play with them later on. There are many more templates that you can see in the Charticulator website, and as you can see, there are lots of them. I like this one the best. And of course, the getting started with Charticulator page that will be able to help you with your journey further. Now, other features that we have explored in the previous slide. So we have got the color picker. So this lab is displaying the total sales and so on inside the data set of the Van Arsdale sales company. And as you can see, this all with old colors. So for example, if we want to come here and add a trend line, for example, let's add a line of some kind. So let's add a trend line. We can now pick a color that is much more exciting. We have more colors, and we can pick the color in any color that of our choice. As you can see, you have the RGB value and the other values here. So so this is the improvement. You can see here the preview. This is the improvement of the color picker, and now we can do it for everywhere that we are picking our colors. Another exciting improvement was the shapes. So for the shapes, improvement, as you can see, we have the heart shape, for example, and there are so many more. So we have this shape. I wish I knew what that is. I don't remember the English word, sorry. And in this shape in particular, we can also format it. You can see that there are so many more options than what used to be with backgrounds and so on. Shadows, actions, things that were not available before inside those shapes in here. So one of the things that you will use shapes the most is for navigation and for some kind of a button navigation between your reports and things that you are doing, and between your reports and the ability to add those shapes, to have shadows, to have all those kinds of color picker will help you to work and design visually stunning reports. So after reviewing some of the visual characteristics, let's go back to the presentation. And let's see what else we have got. So we have got something extremely important, which is object level security on general availability now. So more information can be found, of course, in the security and the white paper in docs. So it is available for premium and pro. And that means that the model authors can secure sensitive information from report viewers. And object names and metadata are also secured to prevent any malicious users from discovering and accessing anything. So this is now it's generally available, and this is a feature that was requested by many customers. I know that even back when I was working as a consultant, this was a feature that was really popular among customers. Service updates. So easier report sharing via links. So your your overall experience has improved. Improved the create on top published data set experience. What does it mean? That you can create reports on top of published data set. Sometimes there were a bit of a problems in there because you create everything online in the service. Unfortunately, I can't show you the service today because it's a Microsoft tenant. And in there, there was an improvement of how it all works. Enhancement to the sensitivity labels. Another thing that we are labeling the data according to the sensitivity. Adding those labels to the to your data sets and data sources, and this it was improved. Please use the sensitivities labels. It is enabling the governance policy, security, and so on. Security in the full data journey from Azure to Office, and I will talk about this a little later as well. And admin API set labels in Power BI. So premium update and premium per user and premium per user data flow are a general availability. So premium per user license, this is something that happened actually in March in Ignite. It was announced. I don't know if you guys talked about it or not yet, but this is a mini revolution because this is a premium subscription per user and not per the entire organization. And there is even a discount if you already have an E5 or Pro licensing assigned. And part of those enhancements for the premium users are the enhanced data flow, are the data flows that are working much better. You have the enhanced compute engine. So this is what the print screen is showing regarding how you activate it. You have abilities for direct query, computed entities, of course, the largest storage capacity, linked entities, and incremental refresh. Incremental refresh is, of course, extremely important when you have large data models and tables and many users in your organization. So check this out, especially now that it is not that expensive. Connectivity and model, automated table detection from Excel. This was also something very important, especially with the next feature that I'm going to demonstrate. Automatic table detection from JSON as well. Direct query for Power BI database and Azure Analysis services. This is something from the preview. Before that, you could not direct query the Azure Analysis service, the online capabilities. Now you can. You had many workarounds. Now you can just basically direct query that. Cross filters supports many-to-many relationship. I'm not sure if this is a good idea or a bad idea because many-to-many relationships is not always a good idea in a Power BI settings. And it is confusing the filters quite a lot and makes your model less efficient. But if you really have to, and some of the case scenarios are something we discuss in data modeling and data shaping training, instructor-led training, but also, of course, Ken probably has in his trainings a reference to what is many-to-many and why to use it or not. Performance to improvements for the if and switch function. This is a little bit on the background. For those of you who uses the switch functions and you've seen that sometimes it makes the report a little slower than usual if you use the log analyzer in your desktop. So this is another thing. Model view UI preview, and I will show you how it looks like. And calculate filters are easy to use. Again, improvement in the behind the scene of how everything works. Now this slide is for the advanced dev among you. So there are the XML endpoints, and please, that means that Power BI maintains the security-related data source information, credential and privacy outside the data set. And this is supporting the common data modeling tools, previously only supported with Azure Analysis Services and SQL. This is what I told you that we talked about it a little more. So now we have the ability of the configuration in the cloud with those both data sources inside Power BI. So for more exploration, Pete, please go ahead and read this blog post, I believe, by Chris Finland. And Power Automate visual for Power BI preview. So now you can basically run a flow from your Power BI. I believe that Chuck and other people have demonstrated in this user group and other places how you can write Power Up from Power BI. Now you can write, now you can run a Power Automate function as well. So for example, a flow here will be triggered and ran with this run flow button that you can see, and it will post any action inside Teams. whenever something is happening in the Power BI report according to the conditions that you have defined in the flow. And we will get there right away. But before that, if we are talking about Teams, so Power BI and Microsoft Teams, now you can manage those features inside the Microsoft Teams Admin Center, and you can allow the Power BI report to be shared inside Teams, and you can have many functionalities and working with Teams and Power BI report. Now, let's get back here and go to this page in order to insert the Power Automate button. So what do? I also go to the gallery, as I usually do, to the store in order to import the new visual. And I've got this, the Power Automate for Power BI, and I import it here. Now, in here, there is a very clear solution of explanation of what we should do. We are adding data, set up the flow, apply and share, and the format the button that was displayed there. And so we click here on the edit button. And here, I believe I already pre-configured. I really wish that it is going to work. Give it a second or two. And here, I've already pre-configured the flow, but of course, I can configure other flows. This was the send to Teams message from Power BI. This is what was displayed in the little GIF inside the presentation. We can create button in SharePoint list, create task from Power BI, and so on. In this case, I have already created a flow in order to edit and update an Excel from Power BI. Around 30, maybe 60 more seconds, and I'm done. Sorry, I don't about that. I know that it's already 6:21. So in the Microsoft Power Automate, on Power BI button click, this is we can see this is the trigger of the action. So we can update a row in Excel. So this Excel file is somewhere inside my SharePoint. I think I put it here. So this is the Excel file inside test Yana. This is a SharePoint site. We have the test book and the book, and in there, what is happening is it's every column, the user ID in this case, and the username will be added in the columns of my choice. Now, getting back to the automatic table detection, this is wonderful. That is now generally available because this has to detect a table. And if you do not have a table inside your Excel file, this will not work. So it's great that Power BI added that as well. So after that, I can save and apply, and then I can edit the button that this flow is going to activate. So this was 5 seconds about Microsoft Power Automate and Flow, Power Automate and Power BI. Just one last thing before I give the stage up to back to Joseph and Kent. Our opportunity for Power BI report developer with Inverno, formerly known as Blue Silver Shift. I worked with them. They are great. They are looking for an advanced developer, and this is their Inverno. This is the company, and John Dobson is the one who is looking. So if you are looking for your next opportunity, this would be great. I can share with you the email in chat later on, or the LinkedIn in chat later on, or of course you can find them. So take it away, Joseph.
Yana Berkovich, everybody. Welcome back, Yana. And the good news, folks, on this one here is that Yana actually said that she cut half the material out because she didn't have time to cover it. Dude, I cannot believe how much you can fit into 15 minutes. I will
60.
also say for everybody that found that was a little fast, we will be posting this online, and it will be on YouTube, and there are controls there to slow it down, which is always useful when we're getting a light speed presentation. So Yana, that was awesome. Thanks. There was a ton of stuff to cover there, and we've missed having you with us to do these kind of things. Always entertaining and awesome.
Whenever you're ready.
All right. All right. Joseph, I think it's time to turn it over to you, and you get to follow all of that with building some exciting financial statements.
Yeah, I know. Buddy? I mean, I'm yeah, I know. Thank you. I mean, thank you, Yana. I mean, yeah, I don't go quite as fast. I can't cram quite as much in, but I'm always tempted to do the same. But okay, are we good to go, Ken?
We are good to go. I can see your screen, and yeah, okay. Fire away.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so thank you everyone for being here tonight. My name is Joseph. I usually do the What's New in Power BI at the Vancouver meetup group. Yana stepped in for me today, so thank you so much. As Ken said, it was great having you back. But today I'm really excited to present my presentation, Financial Statements with DAX in Power BI. So just before we jump into the presentation, a little bit about me. Currently, I'm a senior financial analyst of business intelligence and data analysis at Corporate Finance Institute. Really, I'm passionate about driving better decision making by creating, curating, and communicating insights from data. I'm a data enthusiast. I leverage Power BI, SQL Server, and R as well in RStudio to model, manipulate, analyze, visualize data. My website and my blog is up on the slides right now, feathersanalytics.com, where I blog about all things Power Query, Power BI, R, but really most importantly to me, how we can bring the different strengths of these tools together to build powerful solutions that can provide actionable insights. My Twitter and my LinkedIn profiles are up on the slides as well. Really enjoy connecting with the analytics and BI communities, so please feel free to reach out after the presentation today. If you have any questions for the presentation, or really if you just want to talk about, DAX, Power BI, or whatever, would love to talk. So what we have on the agenda for today, we're going to start with a little bit of a review on what are financial statements and define what the scope of the session today is going to be about. Then we're going to cover how we can create a data model that can build both the template and populate the template to build a financial statement. And in particular, how we can pull data from different sources into one data model so we can really build a strong financial statement. Then we're going to get into how we can create custom mapping. So we don't need to rely on source systems strictly anymore. How can we build custom mapping tables so we can get these statements to look exactly how we want to? And then finally, we're going to create some financial statements. We're going to focus on the income statement at the end today. And we're going to go through the full process of dealing with source data, how we can enhance and customize that out, and then populate the templates that we create. So with that, let's jump into the first section. So we have financial statements, and really the core three statements are the income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement. And if we just jump into the income statement first, what this type of statement does is that it displays the performance of an organization or of a business over a given period of time. So we look at revenues at the top of the income statement. All the expenses are listed underneath, and we do this so we can measure and assess the profitability and performance of an organization. So an example of what an income statement can look like, this is courtesy of CFI, Corporate Finance Institute. As we can see, we have the revenue at the top, then we have stuff like cost of goods sold, operating expenses, some subtotals of total expenses, but really right at the bottom, net earnings is one of the big things that we're going to be looking at a little bit later. The next statement is the balance sheet. So this analyzes and displays the financial position of an organization at a given time. So this is a snapshot of, as of today, as of this point, what is the financial position that we're analyzing. And this is where we look at things like assets, and that's equal to liabilities and equity. And if we just go to the next slide to see what an example of that will look like. On the left-hand side here, we have assets. So total assets at the bottom, but that's generally broken down into current and non-current assets with some greater detail in there as well. And then on the right-hand side, we have both liabilities, which again broken down generally into current and non-current, and shareholders' equity at the bottom. That very last line item is the total liabilities and shareholders' equity, and that should, as the name balance sheet suggests, should balance with the total assets on the left-hand side. The final statement is the cash flow statement, and this displays cash movements, again, over a given period of time for an organization. And this is generally broken down into cash flow from operations, investing, and financing. We look at all three of these areas, we add them together to show the net change in cash over a given period. So for our final example, we can see the three sections. We have the operating activities, investing activities, and financing activities. And some of these individual line items and the detail in each of the sections actually come from either the income statement or the balance sheet. So all three of these statements should be used together to get sort of a full picture and a sense on the financial health and performance of an organization. So with that background, just sort of those 5 minutes ago over those three statements types, let's jump into the BI. Let's jump into creating the data model. And just as we jump into creating the data model, first, let's go into looking at what is the business scenario that we've been tasked with. Rather than just show off some specific functionality of DAX or of Power BI, I want to make this as close to a real world scenario as possible. So for the rest of the presentation tonight, this is what we've been tasked with, and this is what we're building our solution towards. So we've been tasked with creating an income statement, the most recent income statement with information from our accounting system. So that makes sense. Our accounting system generally holds all the general ledger accounts, balances, and transactions that have happened over time for our organization. So totally makes sense that we're pulling information from there. And there's probably going to be some categorizations and existing mapping of general ledger accounts to some categories as well. So we can leverage that. So that's great. However, this is a little bit of the twist. The statement requires some additional information that exists outside of our accounting system. So we're going to need to bring in information from other places that's more granular than what the accounting system holds. So when I'm tasked with something like this, and I know I'm going to need to pull in data from different places, I'm going to need to bring it into just one data model. I know that I should be using Power BI. We can use the Power Query Editor to extract, transform, and load data from multiple places, load it into the same data model, and then we can build our report and our visuals off of that data model. So to create this, the data sources that we're going to look at initially, from our source system, from that accounting system, we're going to look at some aggregated GL transactions for the year. So we have some GL balances. Also from our source system, we have some existing GL categorizations. But then we're going to be provided a list of GLs that we need to remap. So we're going to need to move some of those balances from within certain GL accounts to other ones. So that's an exercise we're going to be going through. We're also going to be given a list of GLs to remove. So we actually want to get rid of certain amount of the balances that come to us from our source system. And in order to do some of these things, we're going to need to create a custom GL categorization. And when we jump into Power BI, I'll show exactly what that means. On top of the data model that we're going to build, we're going to need to create some DAX measures. So it's these measures that are going to populate the body of the income statement that we're going to be building a little bit later. So DAX stands for Data Analysis Expressions. And generally DAX measures aggregate data. They can take a column or a table of data and they return a single value. Some DAX functions can return tables and can do some other things, but for today, our focus is going to be on taking multiple rows of data and using a DAX measure to aggregate it and returning a single value. The other great feature of DAX is that it provides the ability to explicitly control the filtered context of a measure. And what I mean by that is typically in Excel or even in Power BI or another data visualization tool, we can control the filtered context by adding columns from our data set into a visual, like into onto the axis, or onto the legend of a column chart, for example, or into the rows or columns of like a matrix visual, or in a pivot table in Excel. And what we're doing there is we're implicitly creating that filtered context because we're adding columns from our data set into the report, and that's what slices and dices the measures in the body of that visual or in that pivot table. What DAX gives us the ability to do is explicitly control that measure, or explicitly control that context within the measure itself without needing to drag those columns onto the body of our report, onto the canvas of our report, or into our pivot table. So this is extremely powerful stuff. We're going to jump into it right now. So why don't we head over into Power BI and we can start going through our example for today. So we already have the beginnings of a report here. We have 3 visuals on this first sheet. We have a bar chart, big bar chart, where we're visualizing balance by RGL numbers. Then over to the right-hand side, we have a table visual where we can see some of the existing GL categorization. We have a heading, category, GL, and a balance as well. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a column chart visual where we're looking at the balance by heading and category. But to see exactly what's loaded, why don't we open up the Power Query editor. So we have 2 tables currently loaded to our data model. We have a categories query or a categories table, and this is 3 columns. We have our general ledger account number, and then we have the category that relates to that account number and the heading as well. So this is the categorization table that comes directly out of our source system. The second table that we have available to us is the GL tran or a GL balance table. And this again has the general ledger account number, the date, and then the balance of that account as of that date. So these are the 2 queries that we have available at the moment. I'm just going to close and load that, and then we're going to head to our model view. And let's move these so we can see them a little bit better. These 2 tables are related to each other. We have a one-to-many relationship between our categories and our GL tran table on that general ledger account column. It's 1 on the category side because this is our dimension table. The GL is only listed once with the associated category and heading, whereas in the GL tran table, this GL can appear multiple times. It can have balances at different as of different dates. So best practice is we want to hide the column in the relationship that's on the many side, which is denoted with this star, just because whenever we use the GL field within the body of our report, we want to use it from the dimension table rather than from our fact table, which is on the many side. So I'm just going to go ahead, click the eye icon to hide it from our report view. It still exists, it's still there, it's just hidden so that users can't use it when we're building out the report. So let's go back to the report view here. So we have a pretty good start, right? Like we can see the balance by the GL number. This is looking good, and we can see that we have in the headings column here revenue, operating expenses, a tax expense. So all of those things we're going to need for our income statement later. So it actually looks like we're in a pretty good starting spot. Everything's mapped, everything's flowing down. And in fact, if we were just building our income statement exclusively from our source system, we'd be good to go ahead right now. But we know that in the task that was given to us, we need to bring in data from other places as well. We're going to need to remap some balances, and we're going to need to remove some balances before we can build our income statement. So let's pop back into the Power Query editor, and we'll just bring those in to our data model right now. So I'm going to go to a new source. I'm going to connect to text or CSV, and let's bring in the remap CSV first. And I'm just going to accept all the defaults to bring these in. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more again. And we can see that this has the exact same structure as our GL balance. We have a balance column over to the right and a date and then a general ledger account number. So that's all good. Let's bring in our remove, which is from a text file. So this is a list of balances that we need to remove all together from our statements and from our model. So I'm going to open that. Again, I can accept the defaults. The only thing I'm going to do is change the data type of the GL column to be text. This is so it matches our other fact tables, but also, although it's a numeric value, we're not going to need to do any math on this column. Like, we're not going to need to aggregate this GL number. So text is absolutely fine. It's just an identifier. So now that I've connected to this additional information, I can go ahead and I can close and load that to bring that into our data model. So if I pop back into the model view, and let's put our existing source table at the top. We have our remap values in the middle here, and then we have our new remove table at the bottom. And what's handy is that the one-to-many relationship has already been created automatically for us. Power BI recognized that this GL table exists in both and has created the correct one-to-many relationship. So all I need to do at this point is, again, best practice, hide that column on the many side. That's all I need to do, and we can pop back into the report view. Perfect. So now it's time to update some of the visuals in the report. So if I expand the fields pane, I'm going to start with this bar chart to the left-hand side. I'm going to drag the balance field from remap onto values as well, and then do the same thing for remove. So this is kind of interesting. We can see that for our GL account number 1, okay, the blue bar came from our source system, it's positive. The remap, we have a negative gold bar. And then we also have a small negative amount that's coming from that remove query. So these negative balances should be subtracted from this big positive balance from our source system. Okay, that makes sense. We see the same thing for number 2 and number 3. But then when we see the big positive gold bar, there's a blank value on the axis. So I'm not loving that at the moment, but let's add these same fields to our table visual to see if we can get a little bit more insight. So I'm going to add, once again, the remap balance to our table and the remove balance to the table as well. So interesting, I'm seeing the same thing for GL number 1. We have a positive balance, a negative remap balance, and a negative remove balance. But whenever the remap balance, this column, is positive, it looks like it's blank, right? So this blank value over here corresponds to this blank row, but does have a value. So we're going to need to deal with that somehow. But let's go back into the Power Query editor and see exactly why is this happening. So I'm going to go to the remap. When we looked at remove, all of these seem to be mapping correctly to an existing line item. So I don't need to worry about remove. Let's focus on remap. And if I just look to see where the balance is positive, like let's just sort this in ascending order. All these positive balances down here, the GL is net.2, net.3, net.1. And if I go to my existing category dimension, those GL numbers don't exist. And the reason for that is these net.2, net.3, net.1, those values don't exist in our source system. They exist because we were provided a list of additional information to bring in to enhance the information that we had from our source system. But they themselves didn't exist. So we're going to need to update our categories table to account for these new GL numbers. But one thing I want to call out at this point as well is there just seems to be some duplication of these balances. Like if we look at this first row here, at the end of 2019 had a balance of negative 55. Whereas net.1 at the exact same date had a balance of positive 55. So it seems that for every transaction in this remap list, we see a positive balance with a corresponding negative balance to an existing GL. And the reason for this is this remap query is we're not adding any new balances or new transactions to our financial statement. All we're doing is reallocating existing balances to new line items. So this means that if we were to just bring in these bottom 6 rows and we were to add 55 and 50 and 40 onto our financial statement, we'd be overstating our financial position because these balances already exist in the GLs under 1, 2, and 3. So we can't just add these on. This is why we need to bring them in twice, because we need to remove them first from where they already exist, and then add them in to a new GL account, number, and then we can map that to a new line item, which has that more granular information that we're looking for. So to do this, I mean, there are a few different ways that we can update this categories dimension. I've already built a version where we have added those 3 line items. So I'm just going to update the source for there, get rid of that change type step. And now all we needed to do is add the 3 new GL account numbers onto our categories dimension. And we can see they have the associated categories of product 1B, 2B, 3B. So we're taking some balances out of product 1, 2, and 3 and allocating it to 1B, 2B, etc. Still under the revenue heading. So we're just getting a more drilled down, a more detailed view of this revenue section in our income statement. So I'm going to hit close and load. And then once we load that, let's have a look to see how our visuals change. So this is nice. All these negative values still the same, still allocating to the same GL numbers, but now instead of a blank on the axes, we can see net 1, net 2, net 3. That's good. And over to our table visual in the top right-hand corner, again, we can see this detail down at the bottom with product 1B, 2B, 3B, all have a positive balance, but we're not overstating our financial position because all of these balances are being removed from where they already exist in our data set. So things are looking good. However, at this point, we need to have one column that does this math for us. Like this detail is really good for me as an analyst pulling together this information, but for the sake of our front end, for our front end report, for our income statement, we just need a column that does this math and we can get the net value of this addition and subtraction. So we just need a column that has, like for product 1, 210 minus 105 is 105, and then minus 7, so this should be 98. For row 2 should be negative 13, and so on. So there are a few different areas where I could do this. Like I could do this in the Power Query editor. I could merge all of these tables together, create a new column, and then aggregate that column. Could absolutely do that. I could even do it in DAX itself. I could create a calculated column, which just adds these 3 columns together. But I prefer to do this by creating measures. I actually want to create a measure for each of these 3 columns in these 3 queries exactly as is. And then instead of creating a new column in my data set, I want a new measure that sums up the aggregation, the measure that already aggregates these columns. And there's a few reasons why. If for some reason I wanted to change the aggregation type of the balance that's coming from our source system, I wanted to change it instead of sum to average, just like that. Okay, I've updated it here. Hasn't changed here, so I'd have to click into this visual, go to balance, change that to average, and so on and so forth. So by creating an explicit measure, I set that aggregation type in one place, and if I need to update or change it, I can update it in one place, and it will flow through to all areas of my report. So I like that. I like that I only have to set it in one place, and that I'm explicitly setting the aggregation type as well. I'm not dropping a column name into the values pane, and then I'm at the mercy of someone can go in and change all this, but I don't want them to do that. I just want to say, no, I want this to be an average. I want this to be a sum. The last reason I like doing this as a measure instead of a column is, all three of these fields are called balance. We know they all come from different tables and they're related to the same dimension because we've been working through this example together. But if this report was given to a new user, they might wonder, well, why is balance being displayed 3 times? Why are we getting negative values? Why are we getting positive values? It doesn't make sense. So at this point, I am going to create my first DAX measure that's going to aggregate to give me that sum of the balance column from our accounting source system. So I'm just going to hit the ellipsis from a field on the GL table and hit new measure. I could have done it just selecting new measure on the ribbon as well. There's a few different places within Power BI we can create a new measure. Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see. But I'm just going to call our new measure our GL source total. I want to sum the balance column from our GL tran table. So I get to explicitly set the name. I get to explicitly set the aggregation type here. And when I commit that, when I drop that into my existing visual, actually, sorry, let's click onto the bar chart over here. When I drop that into the existing visual, and let's change this back to a sum, the values are exactly the same as they should be. It's just one has been aggregated explicitly using DAX, one has been aggregated implicitly within the visual within the Power BI report. So I can get rid of that first one, and I can get rid of the average from there as well. So now I'm going to go through and I'm just going to quickly create these total measures for the other balance fields as well. So I'm going to create a remap total, which sums up balance field from the remap. And I'm going to do the same thing from remove as well. I'm going to create remove total of the balance field from remove. So now I'm going to go and I can update my visuals. I can get rid of these balances, add remap, add remove, do the same thing over here, add remap, add remove. And now everything looks exactly the same, except it's being powered by DAX measures that are all explicit. We can audit it, it's easier to look at, and more meaningful names that we can control and update as well. So now when I need to create my final measure, and so we'll call this current balance or current total. We can just define this as adding our GL source total plus our remap total plus our remove total. And this is what I like about using this method instead of using a calculated column or using a column in Power Query. It's a lot more difficult to go back and find how and where we created that column in our data set. Whereas if we do it with a measure, not only do we still have this underlying detail, which is going to be really important for us in order to audit and troubleshoot our solution, but it's really obvious to any user when they click on this current total measure how it's being calculated. It's all written out for us. It's fairly clear. And so now when I drop that into our tables measure, and I scroll over to the right, just like how we wanted, we have 98 in the first row, -13 in the last row. All the math is done correctly. So if we want to update our final column chart in the bottom right, I can take our current total, get rid of balance, and now we have this additional detail of the 3B products, our existing products, and then all of our expenses are negative still. So this is great. We're able to bring in the remapping. We've reallocated to different line items. We were able to remove certain balances that shouldn't be in our statements as well. And now we're ready to go ahead and populate our income statement. So we can head over to the second tab now and have a quick look. So I have a few empty placeholder visuals, but the one we're going to be spending the most time on is this one on the left. So this is a matrix visual. We have our existing heading categorization on the rows of the visual. And now we've created our current total. Why don't we drop that into the values? And okay, we have revenue. That's looking okay. We have operating expenses and we have a total, but there's a few things wrong. Like all of these headings are not in the correct order. We don't have any of those intermediate subtotals. Like we don't have our earnings before interest, tax, or depreciation. We don't have our net income at the end. We don't have our net income for the start or the end of the period. We just have this total down at the bottom. And the other thing that really jumps out to me is we don't have a date in the columns of our matrix visual. As we said at the beginning, the income statement is always over a given period of time. We have 2 time periods in our data set, but we have a date column across our 3 different fact tables, where really we should have a date dimension. So I'm going to go back into the Power Query editor and I'm going to create the date dimension. So I'm going to go to transform data. I'm going to look at the GL-tran query. So this is what came from our source system. I'm going to right click and reference this. So we can see that the source step in our query now is equal to our existing query. So I'm just going to rename this as date. I'm going to click on our date column. I'm going to remove all other columns. And then from the ribbon, I'm going to remove all duplicates. Now at this point, we could create a full date dimension. We could have, a row for every day within these 2 years. For the sake of our example today and of the scenario we're going through, actually just having these 2 dates will suffice. There are lots of different patterns and resources available to see how you can create a full-fledged date dimension, but we're only going to go this far for today. So I'm going to close and load this to our data model. And once that's loaded, I can go back into the model view. Oh, can I? Yep, there we go. I can go back into our model view. Let's zoom out just a touch, give us a bit more space. Let's make these a little bit bigger. So we can see, unfortunately, this time, the relationships between our dimension and our fact table wasn't created automatically for us. So I'm going to have to go through and create that relation. So I can click on the date column from our date dimension, drag it over to our fact table. That creates a one-to-many relationship between those 2 fields or those 2 columns. I'm going to do the same thing with each of these 3 tables. And then just like how we hid the column on the many side of the relationship, I'm going to do the same thing with date, because whenever we use this date column in the report, I want to make sure it's coming from our date dimension. So I'm going to hide from the report view the date column. And while we're at it, each of these fact tables still has one visible column. It has this balance column. But now that we've created DAX measures that aggregate this column, we actually don't need this in the report, and we don't want our users using this column either. We want them to be using the measures that we explicitly create for them. So I'm actually going to hide this balance column on all of the fact tables. It's still available for us to use. If we need to create new measures on top of this balance column, we can absolutely still do that. We just don't need to see it in our report. So I'm going to hide it. So now the only things visible on each of these fact tables are one or multiple measures that we've created. And when I go back into the report view, oh, I'm getting some weird, there we go. If I go back into the report view, we can see now that the icons for our 3 fact tables have changed. They're now calculators, indicating that the only visible items on those fact tables are measures, whereas the icon for our dimension tables for categories and date are still tables. So I think this is really cool that just at a glance we can see, or if we hand this report off to someone else, they can see that the measures belong in those top 3 tables. That's where they reside. Everything else on our dimension tables are columns that we can use to slice and dice our data, or slice and dice the measures that exist in those fact tables. So at this point, I can go to our date table. I can drag dates onto the columns of our matrix visual. And rather than a date hierarchy, I'm going to change that to be a date. And let's make that display with something a little bit nicer. Okay. So this is a good start. We now have our 2 dates in the columns. We have the beginning of our template, to create our income statement, but we're going to need to go a little bit further. So let's jump back into the slides to see exactly how we're going to do that. We need to create another custom mapping table. So how we're going to do this within the Power Query editor is first we're going to reference our existing category table, and we're mainly concerned with the headers column in that category table. Our next step is we're going to insert some new rows into that headers table. So we're going to be using the table.insertRows function in Power Query to add in the line items that we need for our income statement, but don't currently exist in our category table that comes from our source system. Then we're going to add a sort column to make sure that all of those rows appear in the correct order in our income statement. So ultimately, we want to have something that looks like this, where we have revenue on the top, all the expenses and all the other line items are in the correct order, and then we have net income at the bottom with retained income at the beginning of the period and retained income at the end of the period right at the bottom. So let's jump back into our example to see how we're going to do this. So as I said, I'm going to do this within the Power Query editor. So I'm going to go back into the Power Query editor here. And once more, I'm going to right-click on an existing query, this time the categories query. I'm going to reference it. And this one I'll call our mapping table. The only column of information that I need for this mapping table is our existing heading column. So once more, I'm going to remove other columns and remove duplicates. So we have our revenue, our operating expenses, our depreciation, our interest, our taxes. Okay, these 5 are good, but we needed to add some more. We needed to add our earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation, and we needed to add our net income. So to do this, I'm going to create an additional step for our applied steps on the right-hand side by hitting the add step, this little formula icon. And I'm going to type in table.insertRows. And this function takes 3 arguments. So the first one is the table that we want to insert the rows. So for us, this is just the name of that previous step, remove duplicates. So that's okay. Second argument is the offset. So how many rows into this table do we want to insert these new rows? I just want to insert them at the top. So there's going to be 0 offset. They'll just be inserted right at the top of this table. And then finally, we need to create a list of rows that we want to insert into this table. So I'm going to use an opening brace to start my list. This is how we denote lists in Power Query. And then I'm just going to go to a new line and close the bracket there to give us a little bit more space. So records in Power Query, because that's what we're doing, we're inserting a record into our table, are denoted with the square brackets there. And so in the heading column, I want to insert a new row that has the value of EBITDA. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. Heading is equal to net income. I have a few more to do, but I'm going to commit that at this point. And we can see, okay, we've inserted 2 new rows into our data set, or into our table rather. If I click back to the previous step, we had 5. These 2 that I've defined up here have been inserted. And rather than continuing to type out, I can be a little bit more efficient. I'm going to change this to be net income start of period, and then net income end of period there. And if I commit that, okay, so this is good. Now we have all the line items that we need for our income statement, but I don't want them to appear in this order. I want them to appear in the order that our income statement requires. So I could do this by creating a conditional column and say, you know, if heading is equal to revenue, then 1. If heading equals operating expenses equal to 2, and so on and so forth. But I preferred using a column from examples just because I only have 9 rows in this table. So I'm going to name this my sort column, and where revenue is equal to 1, what column from examples allows us to do is just type in exactly what the values that we need into this new column. So I want our first row to be revenue, our second row to be operating expenses. Then I want our earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation. Let's do interest is 4, taxes is 5, depreciation is 6, and then that leaves our net income is 7, start of period 8, and end of period of 9. And when I commit that, and if I just expand here, we can see that the code that was written for us by using this column from examples is just a really big, messy conditional statement. If heading is equal to whatever, then 3, else if. And for me, I just prefer using the nice interface where we can type in exactly what we want, particularly when we only have a small number of rows like this, where we only have 9 rows, and it does it for us. And I think that's a much better use of my time, and I really like using columns from examples for small little tasks like this. So now if I sort by ascending order on the sort column, just to see, okay, this is great. This is exactly the order I want our headings to be in. Revenue at the top, net income with start of period and end of period at the bottom. So at this point, it looks like we're good to go. I can close and load that. And once that's loaded to our data model, I can go back into our model view, drag the mapping over. This time it has picked up automatically that one-to-many relationship between heading. So let's hide heading on the many side. But if I go back into our new mapping table with heading, let's drop this down. I want to make sure that our heading table is sorted by the sort column, because I don't want heading to be sorted just alphabetically when I insert it in, just like how our existing heading is now. Now when I remove the existing heading from our source system and drop in the new heading into our rows, now it's in the correct order. We have revenue, operating expenses, interest, taxes, depreciation. But okay, we're missing all the rows that we just created. And the reason for this is we right now have current total in the values. And what current total does is it sums up all the balances from those 3 fact tables, rolls it up, and we're slicing it by our date and by this heading table. But all the line items that we just created in the Power Query editor don't have any associated GLs. Like, we have just inserted them manually into that category table. So although there's a relationship between heading to category to our GLs, none of them are actually going to map there. There's no GLs that fall underneath that heading. And if I hit the drop down next to the heading column that's in our rows, and if I hit show items with no data, now we can see we have the full correct order. We have our EBITDA, we have our net income, and our start and our end of period net income, but there's no values there at the moment. So we're going to need to come up with some way of how can we populate these blank areas of the income statement template. So why don't we jump back into the slides and we can see how we're going to do this. So populating the income statement. We need to build a measure that's going to populate this empty template or close to empty template. We do have some values in there already, but to create our final and full income statement. But before we jump in just to look at DAX and build DAX measures, let's do a quick review of the income statement from our earlier slide. So if we look in detail, revenue on the top, that's how we're set up, and we have value for our revenue. And then we have a cost of goods sold. This gross profit line item here is just a subtotal. It takes the revenue, it subtracts the cost of goods sold to give us our gross profit. And we see the same thing down here with this total expenses line item. That's just summing up all of these items above it. And then our earnings before tax is another subtotal. We're taking our total expenses from our gross profit. But really, this earnings before tax is a subtotal of all of these blue values. If we don't look at these subtotals, we just look at all of the balances, this is a subtotal. And after we take taxes away from the earnings before tax, and we subtract the 4,800 from the 16,600, we're left with this 11,000. And again, it's just another subtotal. We're taking all of these expense line items away from our revenue to get to our net earnings. So if we go back to the slide here, already populating our income statement, we have current balance. So that was our the measure we created earlier, the GL source total, plus the remap total, plus the remove total. And as we could see already, this can populate the GL categories that come from the source system. So those headers that come from the source system, we can populate with this current balance. That's totally fine. But what are we going to do with the new categories? Like our income statement right now looks like this, but what we want to end up is with something that looks like this, where our third row is a subtotal of the two above, our net income is a subtotal of everything above, and then our retained income at the end of the period is actually a cumulative value year over year. It's not just what happened this year, it's what has happened this year and all prior years as well. And our retained income at the beginning of the period can simply be our retained income from the end of the previous period. Okay, so that's what we need to do. Like, from a business sense, we understand what we need to create, but then how do we translate that to DAX? Like, how can we create these things using DAX in our report? So we can create a subtotal measure, and that's going to populate our EBITDA and net income line items. We can create a cumulative total, which is going to populate that end of period net income line item, because we don't just want the subtotal for the particular year, we want it for all years, all previous years, I should say, all time. We're going to need to create a measure that populates the start of period by pulling in the cumulative total from the end of the previous period. And finally, we're going to create one measure that can bring all of these things together, and we're going to use a switch statement to do that. the main DAX function we're going to use to create that, the subtotals, the cumulative totals, and to change the date time that we're looking at is the calculate function. So this calculate function takes two arguments. We have a measure, and then we define in some way the modified context. So the measure to modify for the start is probably going to be our current total or our current balance. But we don't just want to look at our current total as is, we want to modify that context somehow. So this is where we can explicitly define in our DAX code what we want that modified context to be. So it doesn't just aggregate to what the line items are in the rows of the report. We can override that and we can display exactly what we want to in those cells, so we can populate our income statement correctly. So for the last time, let's jump back into Power BI and see exactly how we're going to achieve this. So to give ourselves a little bit more room, I'm just going to go into focus mode. So we're only looking at this visual. So we have some blank rows in here, and we need we have our headings field from our new mapping table. But we also have sort. So if I expand this entire level, this is how we're getting these things to be in order with, numbers 1 through 9. And maybe this is something that we can leverage when we're building our subtotal measures. So why don't we start going through and doing that? So once again, I'm going to create a new measure. We're going to call this subtotal. And I'm going to use the calculate function, just like how we said. We need to change our current balance measure somehow. So I'm going to say, if I can type calculate, okay. The expression that we want to modify is our current balance or our current total. And how we want to change it is, if we look here, we want our third row here to be a subtotal of everything above, and we want our net income to be a subtotal of anything above. And what's interesting is that the sort number for each of these rows is less than the sort total for the row we want. So what I mean by that is we want to subtotal the third row. Well, we know that the numbers 2 and 1 are less than 3. So what we actually want to return is not the current total for where sort is equal to 3, we want the current total for all values of sort that are less than 3. So I can use the filter function to do a full table filter. And the table that I want to filter are all rows. So we're going to override the filtered context that's in the report right now. I want all rows from our new mapping table. And I want to return where our sort column is less than the max sort column there. And I'll close all the brackets. So we're modifying our current total by filtering the mapping table that populates the rows. And I want to return the current total for when the sort is less than the max sort. And so the max sort on this row will be 3. So if I hit OK for that, let's do a bit of an investigation to see if that worked. We can drop subtotals onto the values. And we can see, okay, this is interesting. So we do get a value for the second row, 246. Okay, that makes sense because 1 is less than 2. And it's just 246, so that looks correct. And then for row 3, we get 219, which is 246 minus 27. So this looks like it's working. This is good. And we can see for every single row, 246, 219, there's no values here, so it's still 219 again. Minus 18 is 201, minus 14 is 187, all the way to the bottom. And then we get our total row of the subtotal is the same here. So we know that that works. Really happy with that. But once again, we're faced with having 2 columns of information where we only want one column to populate the report. And we only want this subtotal to display where, we want it on the 3rd row and we want it for net income on the 7th row. We don't want it to display for every single row because current balance should populate 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. Like where it already does, we want current total to be displayed there. So I am going to create a new measure once again. And this is going to be called income statement, because this is the measure that's going to populate the body of the income statement. And rather than use calculate, I'm going to use a switch statement. So what switch is it replaces all of those big, long, nested if statements that you may already been using or have used in Excel or used in other programs. And it really simplifies the syntax. Then rather than saying, if A or if A is equal to 2, then return X, else if A is equal to 1, then return Y, else if, we can just define our logical test once right at the beginning, and then we can say, okay, if the result is X, then return Y. If the result is Z, then return 1. If the result is B, then return 2. And it's a much simpler syntax than going through all of these nested upon nested if statements. But a little bit of a trick you can use is that instead of like a traditional if statement, you could say where the value is greater than 50. And then for all of the rows where the value column is greater than 50, it would return one thing. And if it was equal to or less than 50, it would return something else. Instead of having like an explicit logical, sort of logical expression like that, we can just type in true here. Because when we test the value of true, it is true for everything. And so now we can just type in an input that we want, and then the resulting value we want to return based on that input. What I mean by that is we can say that when the max sort, mapping sort, is equal to 3, so just like how it is here, this sort is equal to 3, we want to return our subtotal measure that we just created. And if it isn't equal to 3, we want to return our current total, just like that. So we're just evaluating true. It is true. So when our sort is equal to 3, we want subtotal, if not current total. And when I drop that into our visual, and let's collapse that for a second, we can see we have 246, which is the current total, negative 27, which is the current total, and then 219, that's the subtotal. Awesome. And then we have negative 18, that's current, negative 14, current, 12, current, and then these are all blank because it's not equal to 3. It's trying to populate with the current total, but it can't because it doesn't exist. So we're on the right track here. In fact, I can go ahead and copy this. And we can do the same thing for row 7, which is our net income, because our net income does just subtotal all the rows above it. And now let's take away our current total, take away our subtotal. We're starting to get a lot closer to what our final income statement will look like, because we have our earnings before our interest, tax, and depreciation. Now subtotals the line items above it. The net income statement subtotals all these line items as well. Now we just need to populate our net income of the start and the end of the period. So we're going to need to change that subtotal once again. So to calculate subtotal, we use the calculate function to modify our current total. Now we're going to use calculate again to modify our new subtotal measure to create a new measure once again. So I'm going to go to new measure here, and I'm going to call this end of period. And I want to calculate our subtotal measure. And how I want to modify it is just like how before we filtered the mapping table and then we only wanted to return values that were less than that sort number of the row. We're going to do a really similar thing, but this time on the date table. So we want to filter the entire date table, but we want to return it when the date is less than or equal to, and that's the difference. We want it to be less than or equal to, not just less than, the max date. Like that. And so the reason for that is when we look at the end of period net income, we don't just want it for all the years before, we want it for all of the previous years as well as this year as well. So if I drop end of period into the values here, we can see that for year 1, we get 75. Okay, that's correct. For year 2, we get 320, which if I look at 175 plus 145, yeah, I think that's 320. So I think that works. This looks good. So now we are getting a true cumulative total. We're calculating that subtotal for all time, regardless of date. And now all I need to do is go into my income statement. And once again, add an additional line of logic. So this time where it's equal to 9, instead of subtotal, we want the end of period, like that. And if I can get rid of that end of period, and we can see we're there. We're just one step away from a complete one. We just need the start of period, which is blank for both. And so really all we need is this end of period total. We want to use that for start of period as well. We just want the end of period value from the previous year to be our start of period for the next year. So I'm just going to create one more measure. And let's drop that down. I'm going to call it start of period. I want to use calculate because I want to modify the filter context of our existing end of period measure. I want to return the end of period for the previous year based on our date table. Sorry, based on the date column of our date table. I'm going to hit OK. If I drop that in to do some investigation, we can see start of period. Okay, there's nothing for the first year because there's no 2018. That makes sense. Then when I drop it in for 2020, I'm getting 175 here, which is the end of the previous year. I think that's calculating correctly. So the only thing we need to do is one last time update our large switch statement. So this time when it's 8, let's do start of period and hit OK. And now that we have a line item, or now we have a value that populates the line item for every single value. And at this point, I can actually turn off that grand total because we don't, actually, let's leave it on for now. Now we have a correct and unique value from all different measures being returned with one switch statement that populates each of the columns in our income statement. So I can get rid of that sort. I'm going to add in our categories field. And at this point, I can turn off our subtotals. At this point, here we go. I can turn off our subtotals for the very last time. Let's leave that on. And then when I go back, if I right click and expand the entire level, well, this is kind of weird, actually. We're seeing that, you know, all of these products do roll up to revenue. They do roll up to operating expenses. Everything that's coming from our source looks correct. It's just these ones that we manually inputted. We're returning all of the underlying categories. So we want to turn off the ability to see this category detail. Like, that shouldn't be appearing for these line items. We just want our net income to be net income, and when we expand it, we don't want anything to appear under there because it's really messy. I don't like that. It might be if we go into zoom mode. Now we just have a really, really big income statement with all this unnecessary detail. So one trick that we can do is we can create a variable that controls the display. And we can just do a simple test to say that not is filtered. So if we go back, we can see this is filtered function returns true when they're direct filtered on the specified column. So we don't want to return these additional columns. We can use the is filtered, but we don't want to return it when it's true. We want to return when it's false. So we put the not in front there. And we're just going to use the categories table in its entirety, because we know that there's going to be no relationship between our manually created line items to that categories table. The only relationship from our new mapping table to that categories are for those headers that existed directly from our source system. And so now in this, need to add, we want to return this. Now in each of our statements, we just need to add in this control display. So I can just copy paste that into each individual row. So now we're testing both for the maximum sort number as well as for this control display variable that we've defined up here. And then when I commit that, we can see that our entire income statement has shrunk down now. When we try and expand EBITDA, there's no values underneath. There's nothing underneath net income or the start of period or the end of period. We can't expand it, like it's already been expanded, and we're good. We have a nice clean income statement. I can collapse down everything just to the headers. Let's turn off those subtotals, and now we're looking good. We're done. We've populated the report. We've been able to customize something that was given to us from our source system, and not only bring in additional information into the data model itself, but also create multiple custom mapping tables by updating the mapping table from our source system, creating a new mapping query itself in Power BI to create all these new line items and rows to create our income statement. And then we created multiple measures and one big measure that looked at all of those different things, brought it all together to create our income statement. And I know I went a little bit over time. So with that, I just want to say thank you everyone for coming out this evening. I had a lot of fun going through that. I hope financial statements with DAX, contrary to what Ken said, was interesting. And once again, all my contact information is up there. So if you want to check out my website, check out my blog, please feel free to connect on Twitter or LinkedIn as well. And I will be creating either a video or more likely a blog post to go over how we can create a balance sheet using really similar patterns and techniques that I went over tonight, just looking at the income statement. So thank you, and going to open the floor up for any questions or comments, but handing it back over to Ken now. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Joseph, I'm just going to give you a comment here. I actually found that interesting, so well done. No, that was cool. There's some interesting approaches inside that. I like the way you did that. Very, very neat stuff. So here's the first question. How do I get the source files to practice at my end? Are you going to be sharing the example files as well, Joseph? Or?
I will absolutely be doing that. Yeah, I'm going to put them all up on my website, and then I will send a link. We can put it up in the meetup group site for sure.
Fantastic. Any other questions that we've got inside this? I see lots of comments saying how awesome it was. I don't see any questions coming in on this side, but I'll say I really enjoyed the it's funny, whenever I built financial statements, I always worked from top down, and I thought what was really interesting is that you ended up doing that for most of the way, and then you actually went, and rather than trying to work out the net income for the prior period, you actually skipped to the end first, and I was like, why the heck wouldn't you ever think to do that, right? I mean, it's knock off some of the interesting pieces there, but yeah, no, that was a neat little trick, and I learned some stuff there. That's awesome. Love it.
Cool.
Do you recommend building statements from general ledger detail or trial balance information?
Oh. That's a tough question. I guess I probably have more experience going with the general ledger detail as opposed to trial balance, but I have seen examples where trial balance has been used and aggregated and sort of moved all the way up to statement. So I would say that both are definitely possible, but I would need to see how some of the patterns that we looked at tonight would be able to sort of port over to, obviously a lot more detail in the input files.
For sure. Let me see here. What's the next one that I want to sort of tell? I'm going to try and actually find something on one. There's a question here about do you really prefer dark colors for your matrix and other video or other visuals? That's a style question, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel that's a little bit of a rhetorical question, maybe. For me personally, I do like using like dark mode for applications and dark background and light font, but yeah, I think it's personal preference.
There's another question in here from Rob that was how do you actually go and switch the sign on your expenses so that they're actually not showing as they're showing as positive rather than negative. I can share a link with that because I actually have an article on my site that I've shared a long time ago, which I'll throw into the chat. But I don't know if you have your own piece that you actually want to share on that one at all.
I think, and this I've not actually tried this, so it could go terribly wrong, but I think I actually should be able to just wrap my current total with an absolute value function, because all the math will be correct underneath and the absolute value will happen at the end. I'm thinking
that would probably be a dangerous thing to do, because if you do end up with a revenue that is negative, that would basically eat it off and you'd be in challenge. I think you actually need to go through the process of flipping the sign. So the way that I would generally approach that one is that I actually have a master revenue / expenses category. What I will do is I will actually test if the filter context has one value, being either revenue or expenses. If there is one value, then we test if it's expenses and we multiply it by -1. Otherwise, we leave it as positive, and that will actually flip the sign. So the article that I threw into the chat is the way that I would approach that, and it seems to work, at least in my experience, it's worked very well. Now, having said that, throwing that into your master switch statement, you definitely have to do it in the right place. That would be the thing. So just keep that in mind. But awesome. Outside of that, do you have any reading recommendations for building Power BI financial statements? Absolutely, Joseph's blog. I mean, beyond that, I'm not aware of any books or print that specifically focuses on that topic. I'm not sure if you are.
No, I mean, I think for me, like over the last few years, it's been sort of picking and choosing different blog posts from different places. I've not found sort of a dedicated resource to that. But yeah, it's a good question.
So here's the funny thing, right? So then Todd goes and throws a link into the chat with something that's written by one of my partners on how to do it, right? So Matt Allington has something at Accelerator BI, a different technique, as Todd says, runs about.
Cool. With the profit loss,
building a P&L, yeah. I mean, and this is the thing with this stuff is, I mean, there's different methods for dealing with all these things. I mean, the true one is coming up with something that actually works, obviously, for the scenario and adapting it to your own scenario, right? But
absolutely.
Do you use Power BI Report Builder or something else to export the income statements others build on Power BI datasets?
Well, I guess export to what? I mean, in my experience, I've just published them as Power BI reports to read and analyze and digest. I think generally the intent with Power BI reports is to be like a high level financial statement, as opposed to, you know, really detailed with lots of line items. Like that's definitely still better suited for Excel. So I don't think there would be a use case I could think of where you'd build in Power BI and then export to something else. But I may be misinterpreting the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would say I would generally agree with you if I'm looking at a multi-line trying to recreate a general ledger or something like that that somebody can drill into. I would put it in Excel, just because if there's one thing I can't stand, it's when I drill down in a matrix and I get scroll bars, and what I need is 70 pages down. That just doesn't work for me. So I think the report builder would probably help work for that, for the paginated report builder. But still, for me, I'd push it back to Excel at that point in time, because there's probably a reason I'm trying to drill in and I want to summarize something. So, all right. Well, on that note, I think we're gonna cut the questions at this point in time.